After an excellent dinner with Bartnyansky and considerable cognac, Stepan Arkadyevitch went to the Countess Lidia Ivanovna's a little later than the hour designated. "Who is with the countess? The Frenchman?" he asked of the Swiss, as he noticed beside Alexey Alexandrovitch's well-known overcoat a curious mantle with clasps. "Alexey Alexandrovitch Karenin and the Count Bezzubov," answered the servant stolidly. "Princess Myakaya was right," thought Oblonsky as he went upstairs. "Strange. It would be a good thing to cultivate the countess. She has great influence. If she would say a little word in my behalf to Pomorsky, it would be just the thing." It was still very light outdoors, but the blinds were drawn in the Countess Lidia Ivanovna's little drawing room, and the lamps were lighted. At a round table on which was a lamp, the countess and Alexey Alexandrovitch were sitting, engaged in a confidential talk. A short, lean, pale man, with knock-kneed legs and a feminine figure, with long hair falling over his coat collar, and handsome, glowing eyes, was examining the portraits on the wall at the other end of the room. Stepan Arkadyevitch, after having greeted the countess and Alexey Alexandrovitch, involuntarily turned round to look once more at this singular personage. "Monsieur Landau," said the countess, gently, and with a precaution which struck Oblonsky. The introduction was made. Landau hastily glanced around, and coming up, placed his moist, unresponsive hand in Oblonsky's, and immediately went back to look at the portraits. Lidia Ivanovna and Alexey Alexandrovitch exchanged significant glances. "I am very glad to see you today," said the countess to Stepan Arkadyevitch, motioning him to a chair. "You noticed," added she in a low voice, glancing at the Frenchman, "that I introduced him to you by the name of Landau, but his name is really Count Bezzubov, as you probably know, only he is not fond of the title." "Yes, I heard about it," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "It is said he perfectly cured Countess Bezzubov." "She came to see me today," said the countess, addressing Alexey Alexandrovitch, "and it was sad to see her. This separation is terrible for her. It is such a blow to her." "Then he is positively going?" "Yes, he is going to Paris. Yesterday he heard a voice," said Lidia Ivanovna, looking at Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Oh, a voice," repeated he, feeling that it was necessary to use great prudence among these people where things occurred or might occur without his being able to explain them. A moment's silence ensued, at the end of which the Countess Lidia Ivanovna, as if accidentally stumbling on the chief topic of their conversation, said, with a sweet smile, addressing Oblonsky, "I have known of you for a long time, and I am delighted to make your acquaintance. Les amis de nos amis sont nos amis. But to be truly friends, we must know what is passing in the souls of those we love, and I fear you do not with regard to Alexey Alexandrovitch. You understand what I mean," she said, raising her beautiful, dreamy eyes. "I understand in part that Alexey Alexandrovitch's position," answered Oblonsky, not understanding very well what she was talking about, and preferring to confine himself to generalities. "The change is not in his external position," said the countess, solemnly, and at the same time looking tenderly at Alexey Alexandrovitch, who had risen to join Landau. "It is his heart which has changed. A new heart has been given to him, and I very much fear that you do not realize sufficiently the great transformation which has taken place in him." "That is, in a general way, I can perceive the change in him. We have always been friends, and now," said Oblonsky, answering the deep gaze of the countess with a tender one, as he queried with which of the two ministers she could do him the most effective service. "This transformation cannot diminish his love for his neighbor. On the contrary, the change which has taken place must increase love. But I fear you don't understand me. Will you not have some tea?" she asked, looking toward a lackey who entered with the tea tray. "Not altogether, countess. Of course, his misfortune—" "Yes, he underwent a misfortune, but it became the highest happiness because his heart was renewed," said she, raising her eyes lovingly to Stepan Arkadyevitch. "I believe I shall have to get her to speak to them both," thought Oblonsky. "Oh, assuredly, countess," said he. "But but I think that these changes are so personal that no one likes to speak of them, even to his most intimate friends." "On the contrary, we ought to speak, and to help one another." "Yes, without doubt, but there are such differences of conviction, and, moreover," and Oblonsky smiled unctuously, "there cannot be differences in regard to sacred truth." "Oh, yes, of course, but—" Stepan Arkadyevitch grew confused, and stopped speaking. He perceived that the countess was talking about religion. "It seems to me that he's going to sleep," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, approaching the countess and speaking in a significant whisper. Stepan Arkadyevitch turned round. Landau was seated near the window, with his elbow leaning on the arm and back of a chair, and his head bowed as he saw the looks turned toward him. He raised his head and smiled in a naive and childlike manner. "Don't pay attention to him," said the countess, pushing a chair toward Alexey Alexandrovitch. "I have noticed," she began, but was interrupted by a lackey bringing her a letter. She read it through with extraordinary rapidity, sent a reply, and resumed the thread of her discourse. "I have noticed that Muscovites, the men especially, are very indifferent to religion." "Oh, no, countess. I think that Muscovites have the reputation of being very pious," replied Stepan Arkadyevitch. "But as far as I have observed, you yourself," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, with his weary smile, "I am sorry to say, belong to that category of the indifferents." "Is it possible to be indifferent?" cried Lydia Ivanovna. "I am not indifferent, but rather in the attitude of expectation," answered Oblonsky, with his most agreeable smile. "I do not yet think that the time for me to settle such questions has come yet." Alexey Alexandrovitch and the countess exchanged glances. "We can never know whether the time for us has come or not," said Alexey Alexandrovitch sternly. "We ought not even to think whether we are prepared or not. The blessing does not follow human calculations, does not always light upon the most deserving, but comes to those who are unprepared. Witness Saul." "It seems that it isn't to be now," murmured the countess, following with her eyes the movements of the Frenchman. Landau got up and joined them. "May I listen?" asked he. "Oh, yes, I do not wish to disturb you," said the countess tenderly. "Sit down with us." "The essential thing is not to close one's eyes to the light," continued Alexey Alexandrovitch. "Ah, if you knew what a blessing we experience when we feel his constant presence in our souls," said the Countess Lydia Ivanovna, with an ecstatic smile. "But a man may feel himself incapable of rising to such a height," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, convinced that the heights of religion were not his forte, but fearing to offend a person who, by one word to Pomorsky, might get him the place that he wanted. "You mean that sin may prevent him?" asked Lydia Ivanovna. "But that is a mistaken view. For him who believes, there is no more sin. Sin is already redeemed. Pardon?" she asked as the lackey brought her another note. She read it and answered verbally, "Say tomorrow, at the Grand Duchess's." Then she continued, "For the believer there is no sin." "Yes, but faith without works is dead," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, recalling this phrase of his catechism, with a smile establishing his independence. "That is the most famous passage in the Epistle of St. James," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, in a reproachful tone, looking at the countess as if to recall frequent discussions on the subject. "How much harm the false interpretation of that passage has done! It has driven more persons from the faith than anything else. 'I have no works, therefore I cannot believe,' is the logical conclusion from it. It means exactly the opposite." "It is our monks who claim to be saved by works, by their fastings, their abstinences," said the countess with an air of fastidious scorn. "Our way is far better and easier," she added, looking at Oblonsky with that scorching smile with which, at court, she was wont to wither young maids of honor, disconcerted at the newness of their position. "We are saved by Christ who suffered for us. We are saved by faith," resumed Alexey Alexandrovitch. "Vous comprenez l'anglais?" asked Lydia Ivanovna, and receiving an affirmative answer, she rose, and took a small book from a side table. "Here I'm going to read to you, 'Safe and Happy,' or 'Under the Wing,'" said she, with a look of interrogation at Karenin. "It is very short," added she, resuming her seat and opening the book. "Here the way is described by which faith is attained, and the joy which is higher than any that earth can give, which fills the soul of the believer. A man who believes cannot be unhappy, because he is no longer alone. Yes, and here, you see," she was about to go on reading, when again the lackey appeared. "From Borozdon? Say to-morrow at 2 o'clock. "Yes," she said with a sigh, marking the place in the book with her finger, and looking up with her pensive, loving eyes. "This is the way true faith is acquired. Are you acquainted with MaryAnn? You have heard of her great affliction. She lost her only son. She was in despair. Well, how is it now? She found this friend. She thanks God for the death of her child. Such is the happiness faith can give." "Ah, yes. This is very," murmured Stepan Arkadyevitch, glad to be able to keep silent during this reading, and to think over his affairs a little. "I shall do better not to ask anything to-day," thought he. "Only how can I get out of this without compromising myself?" "This will be dull for you," said the Countess to Landau. "You don't understand English, but this is short." "Oh, I shall understand," said he with a smile, and he shut his eyes. Alexey Alexandrovitch and the countess significantly looked at one another, and the reading began. Stepan Arkadyevitch felt perfectly bewildered by these strange, and to him unwonted discourses to which he had been listening. After the stagnation of Moscow, the complication of life in Petersburg as a general thing had an enlivening effect on him, but he liked it and was at home in it when he was among those whom he knew well. In this unfamiliar environment he was bewildered and stupefied, and could not make anything out of it. As he listened to the reading, and saw the brilliant eyes of Landau, naïve or knavish he could not tell which, fixed on him, he felt a peculiar heaviness in his head. The most heterogeneous thoughts went whirling through his brain. "MaryAnn is happy about having lost her son. It would be good if I could only smoke. To be saved one needs only to believe. The monks do not understand about this, but the Countess Lidia Ivanovna does. What makes my head feel so heavy? Is it the brandy, or the strangeness of all this? I have done nothing out of the way as yet, but I shan't venture to ask anything to-day. It is said they make you say your prayers. Suppose they should make me say mine? That would be too nonsensical. What stuff that is she is reading! But she reads well. Landau Bezzubov. Why is he Bezzubov?" Suddenly Stepan Arkadyevitch felt that his lower jaw was irresistibly beginning to accomplish a yawn. He smoothed his whiskers to conceal the yawn, and shook himself. But the next moment he felt sure that he was asleep, and even beginning to snore. The voice of the Countess Lidia Ivanovna waked him, saying, "He's asleep." Stepan Arkadyevitch waked with a start, feeling a consciousness of guilt. But instantly he was relieved to find that the words "he's asleep" had reference, not to himself, but to Landau. The Frenchman was as sound asleep as Stepan Arkadyevitch had been, but Stepan Arkadyevitch's nap would have offended them. He did not think of this at the time, so strange did everything seem. But Landau's rejoiced them exceedingly, and especially the Countess Lidia Ivanovna. "Mon ami," said the Countess Lidia Ivanovna, cautiously so as not to disturb him, and picked up the folds of her silk gown, in the enthusiasm of the moment, calling Karenin, not Alexey Alexandrovitch, but "Mon ami, donnez-lui la main, voyez-vous?" "Shh!" said she to the lackey, who once more entered the parlor with a message. "I can't receive it now." The Frenchman slept, or pretended to sleep, leaning his head on the back of his armchair, and resting his hand on his knee, but making feeble gestures, as if he were trying to catch something. Alexey Alexandrovitch got up, and, cautiously, though he tripped over a table as he did so, stepped over to the chair, and put his hand into the Frenchman's hand. Stepan Arkadyevitch also got up, and opening his eyes wide, and trying to decide whether he were asleep or not, looked from one to the other, and felt his ideas growing more and more confused. Que la personne qui arrive la dernière, ce qui demande, quelle sorte? The person who came in last, the one who is questioning, let him go away, murmured the Frenchman without opening his eyes. Vous m'excusez, mais vous voyez, revenez vers 10 heures, encore moins demain. You will excuse me, but you understand. Come back at 10 o'clock, or, still better, tomorrow. Quelle sorte? Repeated the Frenchman impatiently. C'est moi, n'est-ce pas? Asked Oblonsky, and at an affirmative sign, forgetting what he was going to ask Lydia Ivanovna, forgetting his sister's affairs, with one single desire to escape as soon as possible, hastened out on his tiptoes, and rushed down into the street as if he were fleeing from a pest-house, and for a long time talked and jested with his driver so as to bring back his spirits. At the French Theatre, which he reached in time for the last act, and afterward over his champagne, at the Tartars, Stepan Arkadyevitch gradually began to breathe more freely in the friendly atmosphere. Nevertheless, all that evening he was very far from being himself. When he returned to the house of Pyotr Oblonsky, where he made his home in Petersburg, he found a note from Betsy. She wrote him that she was very desirous of finishing their talk, and urged him to call the next day. He had hardly finished reading this note and making up a face at it, when heavy shuffling steps were heard downstairs, as of men lifting some heavy object. Stepan Arkadyevitch went out to see what it was. It was the rejuvenated Pyotr Oblonsky, who was so tipsy that he could not walk upstairs, but when he caught sight of Stepan Arkadyevitch, he ordered his attendants to put him on his feet, and, clinging to Stepan Arkadyevitch's arm, he managed to reach his room, where he began to relate how he had spent the evening, till he fell asleep. Stepan Arkadyevitch himself was in such a weak state of mind that, contrary to his custom, he did not fall asleep quickly. What he had heard and seen during the day was disgusting, but more disgusting than anything else was the recollection of the evening at the Countess Lidia Ivanovna's. The next day he received from Alexey Alexandrovitch a flat refusal in the matter of the divorce, and knew that this decision was based on the words which the Frenchman had uttered during his slumber, real or feigned. In order that anything may be accomplished in family life, it is requisite that between the husband and wife there should be either absolute discord or loving harmony. But when the relations between the two are uncertain, and there is neither the one nor the other, nothing can be accomplished. Many families remain for years in places of which the husband and wife both are tired and disgusted, simply because there is neither full discord nor full concord. Unendurable to Vronsky and Anna was their life in Moscow, in the heat and dust, when the sun shone, not now with its springtime beauty, but with its summer fervor, and all the trees along the boulevards had been long in leaf, and the leaves were already thick with dust. Though they had long before decided to remove to Vozdvizhenskoye, still they continued to live in Moscow, which was detestable to them both, and the reason for this was that of late there had been no harmony between them. The exasperation which tended to keep them apart had no tangible cause, and all attempts at an explanation, instead of closing the chasm, only widened it. It was an internal irritation which, as far as she was concerned, had for its source the diminution of his love for her, and on his part his annoyance because, thanks to her, he found himself placed in an embarrassing position, which she, instead of trying to relieve, made still more difficult. Neither he nor she formulated any definite complaints, but each considered the other in the wrong, and at every opportunity tried to make this evident. She considered that he, with all his habits, ideas, desires, with all his spiritual and physical tendencies, had one distinguishing quality, the power of loving women, and this love, she felt, ought by rights to be wholly concentrated on her. This love had diminished, consequently, in her opinion, A part of this love must necessarily be transferred to others or to some other woman, and she was jealous. She was jealous not of any definite woman, but of his diminished love for her. Having as yet no definite object for her jealousy to rest on, she was on the watch for one. On the slightest pretext she would transfer her jealousy from one person to another. Sometimes she suspected him of low amours, which he might enter into as an unmarried man about town. Sometimes she distrusted ladies whom he might meet in society. Then again with the imaginary young lady whom he would be likely to marry in case he broke with her. This form of jealousy especially tormented her, for the reason that he himself had carelessly, in a moment of confidence one day, spoken of his mother's lack of tact in having ventured to propose to him to marry the young Princess Sorokin. And being thus jealous, Anna felt indignant with him and kept finding reasons for her indignation. For all the painfulness of her position, she blamed him. She considered him responsible for her painful state of expectancy which she was enduring in Moscow, as it were suspended between heaven and earth, for the uncertainty in which she lived, for Alexey Alexandrovitch's delay and indecision, and for her loneliness. If he loved her, he would understand the difficulty of her position and save her from it. He was to blame because she was living in Moscow and not in the country. He could not live in the country as she wanted to do. He wanted society, and so condemned her to this horrible position, the trials of which he could not comprehend. And again, he was responsible for depriving her forever of her son. Even those rare moments of tenderness which they occasionally enjoyed did not appease her. She now detected in his tenderness a shade of calmness, of assurance, which he had never before shown, and which exasperated her. It was getting dark. Vronsky was at a gentleman's dinner, and Anna, while waiting for him, had taken refuge in his library, where the noise of the street was less oppressive than in the rest of the house. She walked up and down, going over in memory their last altercation. As she recalled in memory the insulting words that had been spoken, and tried to think what had led to it, she at last remembered how the quarrel had begun. For some time she found it impossible to believe that any dissension could have arisen from such an inoffensive conversation, from a subject which was so unimportant to anyone. But such was the fact. It all began from his having made sport of women's gymnasia, declaring them unnecessary, and she had taken up the cudgels in their defense. He had disrespectfully attacked the education of women in general, and had said that Anna's English protégée, had not the slightest need of knowing anything about physics. That had irritated Anna. She saw in it a derogatory reference to her own occupations, and she conjured up and uttered a phrase which was meant to repay him for the pain he inflicted on her. "I did not expect that you would comprehend me and my feelings as a man who really loved would, but I expected at least some delicacy," said she. And in reality he had reddened with vexation and made some unpleasant remark. She did not remember what retort she then made, but, whatever it was, he had said with a manifest intention of hurting her feelings, "I confess your devotion to that girl does not interest me, because I can see nothing in it but affectation." This cruelty of his, with which he demolished the fabric which she had with such labor erected so as to endure the trials of her life, this injustice of his in accusing her of pretense and affectation, drove her frantic. "It is very unfortunate that only what is low and material is comprehensible to you," she had retorted, and she left the room. When, in the evening, he came to see her, the discussion was not resumed, but they both felt that it was not forgotten. All this day he had not been at home, and she was so lonely and wretched, as she thought of their quarrels, that she resolved to forget everything, to ask his forgiveness, and to take the blame on herself, so as to bring about a reconciliation at any cost. "I am to blame. I am irritable. I am absurdly jealous. I will make it up with him, and we will leave for the country, and there I shall be calmer," she thought. Affectation. Ne naturalno. She suddenly remembered the word which had so affronted her, above all in his intention of causing her pain by it. "I know what he meant. He meant by affected that I did not love my daughter, but loved another's child. What does he know of the love a child can inspire? Has he the least idea what I sacrificed for him in giving up Serosa? But this desire to wound me! No, he loves another woman. It must be so." And seeing that, even while she wanted to calm herself, she was once more going over the circle she had so many times traversed, and was once more returning to the same state of irritation, she was horror-struck. "Is it wholly out of the question? Can I not attach him to myself?" she queried, and then she began at the beginning again. "He is true. He is honorable. He loves me. I love him. In a day or two dissension will be ended. What is necessary? Calmness, gentleness, and I shall bring him back to me. Yes, now, when he comes, I will tell him that I was to blame, although I was not to blame, and we will go off." And, in order not to think any more, and not to give way to her irritation, she gave orders to bring down her trunks, to begin preparations for departure. At 10 o'clock, Vronsky came in. "Well, did you have a gay time?" asked Anna, going to meet him with an apologetic and affectionate look on her face. "As such things usually are," answered he, noticing at once by her face that she was in one of her best moods. He was already accustomed to such metamorphoses, and this time he was particularly glad, because he himself was in his happiest frame of mind. "What do I see? This is good," he added, pointing to the trunks in the entry. "Yes, we must go. I went out to walk to-day, and it was so good that I longed to get back to the country. There's nothing to keep you here, is there?" "I should like nothing better. I will be back immediately, and we will talk it over. All I want is to change my coat. Have the tea brought." There was something irritating in the tone in which he said, "This is good," as one speaks to a child which has ceased to be capricious, and still more irritating was the discrepancy between her apologetic and his self-confident tone, and for a moment she felt rising within her the desire to be pugnacious. But making an effort to restrain herself, she relinquished it, and met Vronsky as gaily as before. When he came in, she told him calmly the incidents of the day, and her plans for departure, using in part the very words she had thought over. "Do you know, it came over me like an inspiration," said she. "Why wait here for the divorce? Will it not be all the same when we are in the country? I cannot wait longer. I want to stop hoping about the divorce. I don't want to hear anything more about it. I think it won't have any more effect on my life. Don't you agree with me?" "Oh, yes," said he, looking with disquietude at Anna's excited face. "Come, tell me what you did. Who were there?" said she, after a moment's silence. Vronsky named over the guests. "The dinner was excellent, and we had a boat race, and it was all very jolly. But in Moscow nothing can be done sans ridicule. Some women, the swimming teacher of the Queen of Sweden, gave us an exhibition of her art." "What? Did she swim for you?" demanded Anna, frowning. "Yes, in an ugly red costume de nation. She was old and hideous. What day do we go?" "What an inane idea! Was there anything extraordinary about her method of swimming?" asked Anna, not replying to his question. "Not at all. I tell you it was horribly stupid. When have you decided to go?" Anna tossed her head as if to get rid of a disagreeable thought. "When shall we go? The sooner the better. Tomorrow we can't, but the day after." "Yes. No. Wait. Day after tomorrow is Monday. I shall have to go to maman," said Vronsky, somewhat confused, because as he mentioned his mother's name he saw Anna's eyes fixed with a look of suspicion on him, and his confusion increased her distrust. She forgot the Queen of Sweden's swimming teacher in her alarm about the Princess Sorokin, who was living at a country seat in the suburbs of Moscow with the old countess. "Can't you go there tomorrow?" "Why, no, that's impossible. There is some business that I must attend to, a power of attorney, and the money will not be ready tomorrow." "If that is so, we won't go at all." "But why not?" "I won't go if it is put off later. Sunday or never." "Why so?" cried Vronsky in astonishment. "There's no sense in that." "It has no sense for you, because you never take me into account at all. You can't understand my life. The only thing that interests me here is Hannah. You say that is hypocrisy. You said last evening that I did not love my daughter, but that I pretended to love this English girl, that this was affectation. I should like to know what can be natural in the life I lead here." For an instant she came to herself, and was frightened because she had broken her vow. But, though she knew that she was dashing to destruction, she could not resist the temptation of proving to him that he was in the wrong. She could not help heaping insults on him. "I never said that. I said that I did not sympathize with this sudden tenderness for her." "Why do you, who boast of being straightforward, tell me a lie?" "I never boast, and I never tell lies," said he, repressing the anger which was rising within him. "And I am very sorry if you do not respect—" "Respect? That was invented to cover up the lack of love. If you don't love me any more, it would be better and more honorable to say so." "No, this is becoming intolerable," cried the count, suddenly leaping from his chair, and, standing in front of her, speaking in measured tones. "Anna," he asked, "why do you try my patience so?" And she could see how he was holding back the bitter words that were ready to escape him. "It has its limits." "What do you mean by that?" she cried, looking with terror at the unconcealed expression of hate on his whole face, and especially in his fierce, cruel eyes. "I mean," he began. Then he stopped. "I have a right to demand what you wish of me." "What can I wish? I can only wish that you do not abandon me as you are thinking of doing," said she, comprehending all that he had left unsaid. "Everything else is secondary. I wish to be loved, but love is gone. All is over." She turned toward the door. "Stop, stop," said Vronsky, still darkly frowning, but holding her by the arm. "What is the trouble? I said that it is necessary to postpone our starting for 3 days, and you answer by saying that I lie and am dishonorable." "Yes, and I repeat that a man who throws it into my face that he has sacrificed everything for me," said she, alluding to a former quarrel, "is worse than dishonorable. He is heartless." "That settles it. My patience is at an end," cried Vronsky, quickly dropping her hand. "He hates me, that is certain," she thought, as she went from the room in silence with tottering steps. "He loves some other woman. That is more certain still," she said to herself as she reached her room. "I wish to be loved, but love is gone. All is over." She repeated the words that she had said. "I must put an end to it." But how? She asked herself, sinking into a chair before her mirror. The most heterogeneous thoughts crowded upon her. Where should she go? To her aunt who had brought her up? To Dolly? Or simply go abroad by herself? What was he doing alone in his study? Would the rupture be final, or was there a possibility of reconciliation? How would Alexey Alexandrovitch look upon it? And what would her former acquaintances in Petersburg say? Many other ideas of what would happen came into her mind, but she could not take any satisfactory account of them. A vague idea came into her mind and awakened some interest, but she could not express it. Thinking once more of Alexey Alexandrovitch, she recalled a phrase that she had used after her illness, and the feeling that clung to her. "Why didn't I die?" And immediately the words awoke the feeling which they had at that time expressed. Yes, that was the idea which alone settled everything. Death, yes, is the only way of escape. My terrible shame, and the dishonor which I have brought on Alexey Alexandrovitch and Zarosa, all will be wiped away by my death. If I die, he will repent for me then. He will be sorry. He will love me. He will suffer for me. A smile of pity for herself came over her face as she kept mechanically taking off and putting on the rings of her left hand, and with vivid imagination she pictured how he would feel after she was dead. Approaching steps, his steps, caught her ears. She affected to be busily engaged in taking off her rings, and did not turn her head. He came to her, and, taking her hand, said tenderly, "Anna, we will go day after tomorrow if you wish. I am ready for anything." "Well?" said he, waiting. She did not speak. "What do you say?" he asked. "You yourself know," said she, and then, unable to control herself longer, she burst into tears. "Leave me, leave me," she murmured through her sobs. "I am going away tomorrow. I will do more. What am I? A lost woman, a millstone around your neck. I don't want to torment you. I will set you free. You do not love me. You love another." Vronsky begged her to be calm. He swore that there was not the slightest ground for her jealousy, and that he had never ceased and never should cease to love her, and that he loved her more than ever. "Anna, why torture yourself and me so?" he asked, as he kissed her hand. His face expressed the deepest tenderness, and it seemed to her that her ears caught the sound of tears in his voice, and that she felt their moisture on her hand. Passing suddenly from jealousy to the most passionate tenderness, she covered his head, his neck, his hands with kisses. Feeling that their reconciliation was complete, Anna the next morning eagerly made her preparations for departure. Although it was not yet definitely decided whether they should start on Monday or Tuesday, since both days had certain contingencies, Anna was busily making her preparations for the journey, feeling now perfectly indifferent whether they went a little sooner or a little later. She was engaged in her room taking various articles from an open trunk, when Vronsky, already dressed, came to her earlier than usual. "I am going now to see maman. Perhaps she can get me the money through Yegorov, and then I shall be ready to go tomorrow," he said. She was feeling particularly cheerful, but his reference to his visit to his mother's dacha was like a stitch in the side. "No, I shall not be ready myself." And immediately she thought, "So then it was possible to arrange it so as to do as I wished. No, do just as you intended to. And now go to the dining room, and I will join you as soon as I have taken out these unnecessary things," she added, giving something more to Annushka, whose arms were already laden with a heap of articles. Vronsky was eating his beefsteak when she entered the dining room. "You can't realize how odious these apartments have become to me," said she, as she sat down by him. "Nothing is more detestable than these chambres garnies. There's no individuality in them, no soul. The clock, the curtains, and especially the wallpapers, they are cauchemar. I think of Vozdvizhenskoye as of the Promised Land. Shall you not send on the horses in advance?" "No, they will follow us. But were you going anywhere?" "I wanted to go to the Wilsons. I must get a gown. So it is decided that we go tomorrow, is it?" she added in a joyous tone. But suddenly her face changed. Vronsky's valet came in and asked him to sign a receipt for dispatch from Petersburg. Still there was nothing remarkable in Vronsky's receiving a telegram, but he acted as if he wanted to conceal something from her, and, saying that he would sign it in his library, he turned to her. "Tomorrow, without fail, I shall have finished everything." "From whom is the dispatch?" she asked, not hearing him. "From Stiva," answered the count reluctantly. "Why didn't you show it to me? What secret can there be between Stiva and me?" Vronsky called the valet back and ordered him to bring in the telegram. "I did not care to show it because Stiva has a passion for telegraphing. Why need he send me a dispatch to tell me that nothing was decided?" "About the divorce?" "Yes. He maintains that he cannot get a definite answer. Here, see for yourself." Anna took the dispatch with a trembling hand. It read as Vronsky had told her. At the end it said, "Little hope, but I shall do everything possible and impossible." "I told you yesterday that it was absolutely immaterial to me when I received the divorce, or whether I get it at all," said she, flushing, "so that it is perfectly useless to hide anything from me." "In the same way he can hide from me his correspondence with women," thought she. "Yashvin wanted to come this morning, with Vyotov," said Vronsky. "It seems that he has been gambling again, and has won from Pyepstov all that he has and more than he can pay, about 60,000 rubles." "No," said she, Vexed because by this change in the conversation he so evidently insinuated that she was vexed. Why do you think that this news interests me so much that you must hide it from me? I told you that I did not want to think about it, and I should wish that you had as little interest in it as I." "It interests me because I like clearness." "Clearness! But in love, not in mere outside show," said she, getting more and more angry, not at his words, but at the tone of cool calmness in which he spoke. "Why do you want a divorce?" "Bozhe moi, always love," thought Vronsky, frowning. "You know very well why. It is for your sake, and for the children we may have." "There will not be any more children." "I am sorry for that." "You feel the need of it, because of the children. But don't you have some thought of me?" she said, forgetting that he had just said, "for your sake, and the children's." The question of the possibility of having children had been long vexatious and trying to her. She took his desire to have children as a proof of indifference toward her beauty. "Ugh! I said for your sake. More than all for your sake. I am convinced that your irritability comes largely from the uncertainty of your position," he answered, scowling with annoyance. "Yes, now he has ceased to pretend, and all his cold hatred of me is plain to be seen," she said to herself, not hearing his words, but gazing with horror at a cold and cruel judge who looked out of his eyes and mocked her. "That is not the cause," said she, "and I do not understand how my irritability, as you call it, can be caused by the fact that I have come absolutely into your power. How is my position indefinite? It seems to me the contrary." "I am sorry that you are not willing to understand," he replied, obstinately determined to express his thought. "Its uncertainty comes from this, that you think that I am free." "Oh, as far as that goes, you can be perfectly easy," said she, turning from him, and beginning to drink her coffee. She took the cup, raising her little finger, and put it to her lips, and as she drank she looked at him, and by the expression of his face saw clearly that her motions and the sounds that she made in swallowing were repulsive to him. "It is absolutely indifferent to me what your mother thinks, and how she intends to marry you off," said she, putting down the cup with a trembling hand. "We will not talk of that." "Yes, we will too. And I assure you that a heartless woman, whether young or old, your mother or anybody else, does not interest me, and I don't want to know her." "Anna, I beg you not to speak disrespectfully of my mother." "A woman who has no conception of what the honor and happiness of her son consist in, has no heart." "I repeat my request that you will not speak disrespectfully of my mother, whom I respect," reiterated the count, raising his voice and looking severely at Anna. She did not reply, but looked attentively at his face and his hands, and recalled with all its details the scene of the evening before, and his passionate caresses. "Just such caresses he has lavished, and will still continue to lavish, on other women," she thought. "You don't love your mother. Those are simple words, words, words," said she, looking at him with eyes full of hatred. "If that is the case, it is necessary." "It is necessary to decide, and I have decided," said she, and was preparing to leave the room, when the door opened and Yashvin entered. She stopped immediately and bade him good morning. Why, when her soul was full of bitterness, when she felt that she was at the turning point of her life, which might take a terrible direction, why, at this moment, she had to dissimulate before a stranger, who sooner or later would know all, she could not tell, but, calming the inner tumult of her feelings, she sat down again and began to talk with the guest. "Well, how are your affairs? Have they paid you your debt?" she asked. "No, not yet. Probably I shall not get it all. And I've got to leave Wednesday," said Yashvin awkwardly, glancing at Vronsky, and evidently suspecting that a quarrel was in progress. "When do you leave?" "Day after tomorrow, I think," said Vronsky. "You have taken long to make up your minds." "But now it is all decided," said Anna, looking straight into Vronsky's eyes with a look that told him how impossible it was to think of reconciliation. "Didn't you feel sorry for that unlucky Pyepstov?" asked Anna, addressing Yashvin. I have never asked myself whether I pitied a man or not, Anna Arkadyevna. My whole fortune is here," said he, pointing to his pocket. "Now I am a rich man, but I may come out of the club this evening a beggar. Whoever plays with me would gladly leave me without a shirt, and I him. Well, we engage in war, and that makes the fun." "Well, but if you were married, how would it be for your wife?" Yashvin laughed. "But I am not married, and I don't expect to marry." "But how about Helsingfors?" suggested Vronsky, joining in the conversation and looking at Anna's smiling face. But as she met his glance her face suddenly amassed a set and cold expression, as much as to say to him, "I have not forgotten. It's still the same." "And haven't you ever been in love?" she asked of Yashvin. "Oh, Lord, plenty of times. Only remember, one may sit down to cards, but must be able to get up when the time comes for a rendezvous. But I interest myself in love affairs in such a way that I need not be late to play my hand in the evening. And so I always arrange matters." "You misunderstand. I did not ask about that, but about actual—" she wanted to say Helsingfors, but she did not like to use a word which Vronsky had just spoken. Viatov came at this moment to see about a horse which he had bought, and Anna got up and left the room. Before he left the house Vronsky went to her room. She pretended to look for something on the table, but then, being ashamed of this dissimulation, she looked him straight in the face. She asked him coolly in French, "What do you want?" "The certificate for Gambetta. I've sold him," answered Vronsky, in a tone which said louder than words, "I have not time for explanations, nor would they lead to anything." "I'm not to blame," thought he, "if she wants to punish herself. Tant pis pour elle." However, as he left the room he thought she said something to him, and his heart was suddenly touched with compassion for her. "What is it, Anna?" "I said nothing," she answered coldly and calmly. "Nothing. Tant pis," said he to himself. On his way out, as he passed a mirror, he caught sight in it of her pale face and trembling lips. He was tempted to go back and say some comforting words to her, but he was already too far on his way. He passed the entire day outside the house, and when he came home the maid informed him that Anna Arkadyevna had a headache, and begged him not to disturb her. Never before had they let the day end with a quarrel unsettled. This was the first time. This was not a mere quarrel. It was evidently the avowal of permanent coldness. How was it possible for him to look at her as he had done when he came into her room after his document? How could he look at her and see that her heart was full of despair, and then go out with a calm, indifferent face? He had not only grown cold to her, but he hated her because he loved some other woman. This was clear. And, as she recalled all the cruel words which he had said to her, Anna began to imagine also the words which she was certain he would like to say to her and might say, and she grew more and more irritated. "I will not keep you," she imagined him saying. "You may go wherever you please. As you don't care to be divorced from your husband, you probably intend to go back to him. If you want money, I will give it to you. How many rubles do you want?" All these insulting words which the cruel man might say were said merely in her imagination, but she could not forgive him any more than if he had really said them. "But did he not swear to me only yesterday that he loved me? Is he not a sincere and honest man?" she said to herself a moment afterward. "Have I not been in despair several times before, all for nothing?" She passed the entire day, except 2 hours during which she made a visit to her protégés, the Wilsons, in alternate doubt and hope. Was all at an end? Was there any chance of a reconciliation? Should she leave him then and there, or should she wait and see him once again? She waited for him all day. And in the evening she went to her room, telling Annushka to say that she had a headache. "If he comes in spite of that, it will show that he loves me still. If not, it is over, and I shall make up my mind what there is for me to do." Late in the evening she heard his carriage wheels on the pavement, his ring and his steps, and his colloquy with the maid. He believed what he was told. He did not care to make further inquiries, and went to his room. Evidently all was at an end, and death as the only means of establishing a love for her in his heart, of punishing him, and of winning the victory in the struggle which the evil spirit that had possession of her soul was waging with him, clearly, vividly presented itself before her. Now everything was a matter of indifference. Whether they went to the country or not, whether she procured the divorce or not, it was unnecessary. The one essential thing was to punish him. When she poured out her usual dose of opium, and it came over her that if she swallowed all that was in the vial she would die, it seemed so easy and simple that she felt a real joy in imagining how he would mourn, repent, and love her when it was too late. She lay on her bed with open eyes, and watched the dying candlelight on the moulded cornice of the ceiling mingle with the shadows of the screen which divided the room. She vividly pictured to herself how he would think when she was no more, when she was only a memory. "How could I speak to her such cruel words?" he would say to himself. "How could I leave her without saying anything at all? And now she is no more. She has left us for ever. She is there." Suddenly the shadow of the screen seemed to waver and cover the whole cornice, the whole ceiling. Other shadows from the other sides joined in with it. For an instant they seemed to be running, then with new rapidity they trembled, melted together, and all became dark. Death, thought she, and such a great terror seized upon her that for a long time she did not know where she was, and it was long before her trembling hands could find the matches in order to light another candle in place of the one that had burned down and gone out. No, no, anything, only to live. I love him, and he loves me. These dreadful days will go by, she said to herself, feeling the tears of joy poured down her cheeks at her return to life, and to escape her terror she fled to Vronsky's library. He was in his library, soundly sleeping. She went to him, and, holding the candle above his face, looked at him a long time. Now, as he slept, she felt such love for him that at the sight of him she could not refrain from tears of tenderness. But she knew that, if he woke he would look at her with a cold, self-justifying look, and that before she spoke a word of her love she would not be able to resist the temptation of proving to him how wrong he was. Without waking him she went back to her room, and after a second dose of opium she fell into a heavy sleep which lasted till morning, and all the time she was conscious of herself. Toward morning she had the frightful nightmare which she had experienced several times even before her liaison with Vronsky. She saw a little old man with unkempt beard doing something, bending over a gourd, and muttering unintelligible French words, and, as always when she had this nightmare, and therein lay the horror of the dream, she felt that the little old man paid no heed to her, but did this horrible something in the gourd over her head. She awoke in a cold perspiration. When she got up, the events of the day before seemed enveloped in mist. There was a quarrel. It has happened several times before. I said I had a headache, and he didn't come to see me. That is all. Tomorrow we shall go away. I must see him, and get ready for our departure, she said to herself, and knowing that he was in his library, she started to go to him. But, in crossing the drawing-room, her attention was arrested by the sound of a carriage stopping, and she looked out of the window and saw a carriage, from the window of which a young girl in a light hat was putting out her hand and giving orders to the footman, who was at the doorbell. After a colloquy in the vestibule, some one came upstairs, and Anna heard Vronsky's steps in the room next to the drawing-room. Then he ran swiftly downstairs. Anna looked out again and saw him go to the doorsteps, bareheaded, and approach the carriage. The young girl in the lilac-colored hat handed him a package. Vronsky smiled as he spoke to her. The carriage drove away, and Vronsky came quickly upstairs again. The mist which enwrapped everything in Anna's soul suddenly cleared away. The feelings of the day before tore her anguished heart more cruelly than ever. She now could not understand how she could have so far debased herself as to stay a single day under his roof. She went to his library to acquaint him with the resolution that she had taken. The Princess Sorokin and her daughter have brought me the money and the papers from Maman. I could not get them yesterday. How is your headache? Better?" he said quietly, seeming not to notice the gloomy and solemn expression of Anna's face. She did not reply, but, standing in the middle of the room, she looked fixedly at him. He glanced at her for an instant. His brows contracted, and he continued to read his letter. Without speaking, Anna turned slowly about and left the room. He might yet detain her, but she had reached the door. He said not a word. The only sound heard was the rustling of the sheet of paper. "Oh, by the way," he exclaimed, just as she was on the threshold, "do we really go tomorrow?" "You, but not I," answered she, turning round on him. "Anna, it is impossible to live this way." "You, not I," she repeated. "It's becoming intolerable." You will be sorry for this," said she, and she went out. Frightened at the despairing tone with which she spoke these last words, he sprang up and started to follow her. But, on reflection, he seated himself again, and, firmly clenching his teeth, he frowned. That unbecoming threat, as he termed it, irritated him. "I have tried every means," he said to himself. "The only thing left is to pay no attention." And he made up his mind to go to the city and to his mother's again, to have her sign a deed. Anna heard the sound of his steps in his library and the dining room. He stopped at the drawing room. But he did not come to her. He only gave some directions about sending the stallion to Vyatov. Then she heard the calash drive to the entrance, a door opened, and Vronsky went out. Then he came back into the vestibule again, and someone ran upstairs. It was his valet, who was sent to get a pair of forgotten gloves. She went to the window and saw Vronsky take his gloves, then touch the coachman's back and say some words to him. And then, without glancing at the window, he sat down as usual, in the carriage, crossing one leg over the other. And, putting on the gloves, he turned the corner and disappeared from Anna's sight. "He is gone. It's all over," said Anna to herself as she stood at the window, and the impression of blackness which she had felt in the night at the dying of the candle, and that of the nightmare blending in one, filled her heart with chill horror. "No, I cannot endure this," she cried, and crossing the room, she rang the bell violently. She was so afraid to stay alone that, without waiting, she went to meet the servant. "Find out where the count has gone." The man replied that he had gone to the stables. "He left word that the carriage would return immediately if you wished to go out." "Very well. Wait, I'm going to write a note. Send Mikhail with it to the stables. Have him hurry." She sat down and wrote, "I am to blame. Come back. We must explain things. For heaven's sake, come. I'm frightened." She sealed the note and gave it to the servant, and, in her fear of being alone, she went to the nursery. "Why, he is not the same as he was. Where are his blue eyes and his pretty, timid smile?" It was her first thought when she saw the plump and rosy little girl, with her dark curly hair, instead of Seroza, whom, in the confusion of her thoughts, she had expected to see. The little girl was seated at the table, noisily tapping on it with a glass stopper. She looked unintelligently at her mother with two dark, currant-colored eyes. Answering the English nurse that she was well, and expected to go to the country the next day, Anna sat down beside the little girl and began to spin the stopper from the carafe in front of her. The motion of the child's brows and her hearty laugh recalled Vronsky so vividly that Anna, choking down her sobs, rose suddenly and hurried from the room. "Is it possible that all is over? No, it cannot be," she thought. "He will return. But how can he explain that smile of his and his animation after he spoke with her? But even if he doesn't explain it, I shall believe him. If I do not believe, there is only one thing left, and that I do not want." She looked at her watch. 12 minutes had gone by. "Now he must have received my note, and must come back in 10 minutes. And what if he shouldn't come back? No, but that's impossible. He must not find me with red eyes. I'll go and bathe my face. There. Have I brushed my hair yet?" She could not remember. She put her hands to her head. Yes, I brushed my hair, but I really don't remember when it was." She actually did not believe that her hands told her truly, and she went to the pier glass to see. Her hair was properly arranged, but she could not remember anything about it. "Who is this?" she asked herself, as she caught sight of a glowing face and strangely brilliant eyes gazing at her from the mirror. "Yes, it is I," and she suddenly seemed to feel his kisses, and she shivered and shrugged her shoulders. Then she put her hand to her lips and kissed it. "It must be that I am going out of my mind," and she fled to her room, which Anushka was putting in order. "Anushka," said she, as she stood before the maid, not knowing what to say. "Will you go to Darya Alexandrovna's?" said the maid, as if reading her thoughts. "To Darya Alexandrovna's? Yes, I will go there. 15 minutes to go, 15 to come back. He ought to be here." She looked at her watch. "Oh, how could he leave me in such a condition? How can he live, and not be at peace with me?" She went to the window and looked out into the street. Perhaps she had made a mistake in calculating, and she began over again to count the minutes since he left. Just as she was about going to consult the great clock, so as to verify hers, a carriage stopped before the door. It was the count's calash, but no one came upstairs, and she heard voices in the vestibule. It was the messenger, who came back in the calash. She hurried down to him. "They were too late for the count. He has gone to the Nizhegorodsky railway station." "What is the matter? What is it?" she asked, addressing the ruddy, jolly Mikhail, who handed her back the note. Oh, yes, he did not receive it, she remembered. "Go with this note to the Countess Vronsky's in the country, you understand, and bring an answer back to me immediately." "But what shall I do?" she thought. "Yes, I will go to see Dolly, to be sure, or else I shall go out of my mind. I might telegraph." And she wrote the following dispatch: "I absolutely must speak to you. Come back immediately." Having sent the telegram, she went and dressed, and then, with her hat on, she again looked at the stout, good-natured Anushka, whose little, gentle gray eyes were full of sympathy. "Anushka, my dear, what am I to do?" murmured she, dropping into an armchair with a sob. "You mustn't excite yourself so, Anna Arkadyevna. Go out for a drive. That will divert you. These things will happen," said the maid. "Yes, I am going out," said Anna, collecting her thoughts and rising. "If a dispatch comes while I am gone, send it to Darya Alexandrovna's, or... No, I will come back. I must keep from thinking. I must do something, and go out, and, above all, get out of this house," thought she, listening with alarm to the wild beating of her heart. She hastened out and got into the calash. "Where do you wish to go?" asked Pyotr, just before he took his seat on the box. "To Znamenko, to the Oblonskys'.